Welcome to the Hindu Daily. We're diving straight into the editorial section today, starting with a pretty hard look at India's 2025 foreign policy.
Yes, and the article kicks off by highlighting this huge gap between expectation and reality.
Right. At the start of the year, there was so much optimism. The talk was all about resumed diplomacy, a full calendar, and, finally closing those big bilateral trade agreements.
Especially the ones with the US and the EU. Those were supposed to be the big prizes.
But what the sources reveal is, as you said, a great disconnect. The reality India faced is much more challenging.
Profoundly challenging, and across four interlocking areas at the same time: economic security, energy security, global stability, and, of course, regional security.
Okay, let's unpack that economic front first, because the article makes a bold claim. It says 2025 proved to be the most difficult year for India-US ties this entire century.
It's a strong statement, but when you look at the details, you can see why. This wasn't just a cooling of relations. The Trump administration took very specific punitive actions.
Punitive how?
Well, they levied a steep 25% reciprocal tariff on a whole range of Indian goods. And this wasn't random. It hit key labor-intensive sectors directly.
So we're talking about industries that employ millions of people.
Exactly. Apparel, gems and jewelry, seafood. The source cites direct consequences like factory closures and, major layoffs, particularly in the south and west of India.
And on top of that, there was this energy security angle that was weaponized against India.
That was the real masterstroke, in a way. They imposed a 25% surcharge specifically on Indian imports of Russian oil.
So India was essentially paying a tariff on oil it was buying from a third country.
Precisely. And that move effectively made India the most heavily tariffed trading partner for the U.S., which is, it's a stunning position to be in.
And there was collateral damage too, right, with immigration?
Yes, a tightening of the H-1B visa rules. And that's not just an immigration issue. It directly hits remittances, that crucial flow of money from Indians working abroad that helps stabilize foreign exchange reserves.
So while some smaller deals got done, I see the UK, Oman, New Zealand, the big ones with the US and EU are still just pending.
Still pending. And that economic uncertainty really bled into the wider geopolitical landscape.
Which brings us to global strategic stability and the U.S. 2025 National Security Strategy, the NSS. The sources say it was ambiguous.
Very. And if you compare it to the 2017 version, the difference is stark. The 2017 NSS was explicit. It called out China and Russia as revisionist powers.
It was very direct.
It was. The 2025 version, however, completely avoids that direct criticism. And for India, which the previous NSS had called a leading global power, this new one offers very limited sort of generalized language about the Indo-Pacific.
That softening of the language must have set off some alarms in New Delhi.
Absolutely, especially with all the speculation about a potential G2 arrangement between the U.S. and China. It really calls into question how deep the U.S. commitment to alignment with India actually is.
And all of this is happening against the backdrop of a weakening international order.
That's right. The article points to the peace proposals for Gaza and Ukraine, which many critics argue just favor the aggressors. It signals a weakening of the whole rules-based system.
And China sees that as an opportunity.
Of course. They're pushing their own concept of global governance, which is, at its core, an alternative system where state sovereignty basically trumps liberal norms like human rights.
And then things got volatile, much closer to home. Let's talk about the Pahalgam terror attack in April.
And India's response, Operation Sindoor. Militarily, it seems to have been effective, but the diplomatic fallout was, well, it was troubling.
How so?
There was very little open international support for the cross-border response. And what was more damaging, really, were these persistent, unconfirmed reports about India losing jets during the operation.
And the government's response to those reports?
That was the problem. There was no credible confirmation or denial, just a sort of silence that created an information vacuum, and that erodes trust.
Meanwhile, other regional headwinds were picking up.
A new Saudi-Pakistan Mutual Defense Pact, for one, and deteriorating ties with Turkey and Azerbaijan. It's a complex picture.
So what's the big lesson here for 2026? The source mentions moving beyond performative diplomacy.
And performative aggression. The core lesson is about consistency and self-awareness. India can't fall into this trap of being a Vishwa victim, blaming everyone else for diplomatic setbacks.
And it has to look inward as well.
That's the most crucial point. You can't credibly question democracy in, say, Bangladesh if you're simultaneously engaging with the Taliban. You can't condemn attacks on minorities abroad if you don't address them with the same vigor at home. Your moral authority dissolves if it's not applied consistently.
That's a very high standard to meet. Okay, moving from that grand geopolitical scale to something very local. Let's turn to Article 2, the invisible tax and the human city.
This one really zooms in on a critical flaw in how we think about modern urban planning,
Which is
the failure to acknowledge who actually makes up the city. We design these sleek, smart cities based on an idea of a static, homogeneous user, and that's just not the reality.
it creates a disconnect between the design and the actual lived experience.
A huge one, and the article gives this disconnect a name: the invisible tax.
What exactly is that? How does someone pay this tax?
It's the systemic marginalization that new residents, especially migrants, pay when the city implicitly enforces a single language or single culture. There's this unspoken expectation: do what the Romans do, assimilate immediately.
And if you can't,
Then you pay a price, not in money, but in friction, in exclusion. Every interaction becomes a hurdle.
and that friction has real economic costs. The article calls it an economic roadblock.
It absolutely is. I mean, just imagine trying to get a job or find housing or access government benefits when all of the forms, all the signs, all the officials operate only in a language you don't fully command.
Bureaucratic maze.
An impossible one. And it often pushes capable people into the informal economy, where they're vulnerable to exploitation and have no path for social mobility. The city needs their labor, but its own systems block their progress.
So the fundamental design flaw is about who the city is being built for.
Exactly. The infrastructure, the tech, it's all conceived for the established resident. The newcomer is rendered invisible. And this gets worse when the planning bodies themselves don't reflect the city's cosmopolitan reality.
So what's the solution? It sounds like it's less about building more flyovers and more about empathy.
That's the heart of it. The solution is to see cities as fluid, dynamic entities, not fixed blueprints. The article suggests small but targeted investments.
Such as?
Cultural sensitization training for public-facing staff. Think about police officers, healthcare workers, housing clerks. This isn't just about being nice. It's a huge gain in efficiency, and it's about upholding people's basic rights.
So a sense of belonging is actually a key piece of urban infrastructure.
It is the most important piece, more than any smart traffic light.
Moving on to our opinion section, we're tackling a very thorny subject this year. Article 3, the confluence of cinematic art and political propaganda. It starts with that classic question: can propaganda be art?
A very controversial question. And the source gives us a really useful technical definition to work with here.
Okay, let's hear it.
It says propaganda has a clear agenda, it uses facts and images selectively, and it panders nakedly to raw emotions like fear or anger to mold public opinion.
And crucially, it's rarely just one person's vision.
Right. It requires a whole ecosystem to get it to scale.
The article focuses a lot on the film Durandar. It says that while it might be better made than, say, the Kashmir Files or the Kerala story, it's still part of that same ecosystem.
Exactly. And when we talk about that ecosystem, we're really talking about the orchestration of commercial success. The source gives a specific example with the Kashmir Files.
I remember this.
Government institutions in several BJP-run states gave employees time off to see it or even bought tickets in bulk. It creates this artificial sense of a blockbuster hit.
And then that same film gets a national award for national integration.
The irony is, it's quite stark.
This really gets to the core of the difference between art that serves power and art that questions it.
That's the dividing line. Art that challenges the status quo. You know, a film that argues for marginalized people to get more power. That's not propaganda. It's going against the entrenched ideology. Propaganda has to work for it.
And the analysis of Durandar shows how this can be done subtly through things like dog whistles.
Yes, there's a specific line highlighted in the article where a character says Pakistan isn't enemy number one anymore, but that many enemies exist within India.
A loaded phrase.
A very loaded phrase. It directly taps into that historical narrative of othering Muslims as the enemy within, a narrative the source traces back to the Ram Janmabhoomi movement in the mid-'80s. It's recycling old fears.
The article also debunks this idea that there's an equivalence between this kind of cinema and the progressive writers' movement films of the 50s and 70s.
Yes, that comparison just doesn't hold up. The progressive films were about social reform and justice. They weren't trying to incite hatred against any community.
Whereas today, this propaganda ecosystem is actually affecting how films get made.
Directly. Filmmakers are being pressured to remove cast names, like what happened with the film Fool. And worse, they're deliberately inserting what the article calls rage-baiting scenes.
Scenes designed specifically to cause a storm on social media.
Exactly. To drive viewership and sell tickets, it's a cynical feedback loop.
So this leaves us, as the audience, in a tough spot.
Yeah.
Is it okay to appreciate the technical skill of a film if you find its message manipulative?
It's a dilemma every thinking person faces. Art isn't simple. It's perfectly possible to admire the cinematography or the acting while being deeply skeptical of the message.
We can enjoy a good villain.
Of course. Or you can love a classic like Sholay without endorsing its feudal patriarchy. The key is critical thinking. The more you engage with and question the message, the less susceptible you are to the manipulation.
That's a really crucial takeaway. Okay, let's pivot now to the science section and Article 4, which is, it's a very difficult read. Shadow of the Bite. India's fatal rabies crisis.
It is. The article opens with this absolutely gut-wrenching scene from the Epidemic Diseases Hospital in Bengaluru.
It describes the final stage of the disease.
Yes, the hydrophobia, the hallucinations, the terror, and the fact that this was patient 17 just this year in that one hospital, it just hits you, the scale of the tragedy.
And the national scale is even more shocking. India accounts for a third of all global rabies deaths. That's around 20,000 people a year.
And it's overwhelmingly a disease of the poor and the vulnerable. Daily wage workers, people in remote communities, and dogs are the main reservoir for the virus.
The article explains the unique way the virus travels, which is why immediate treatment is so critical.
Right, it doesn't go through the bloodstream. It travels slowly up the nerves to the brain. That slow journey is the window of opportunity you have for post-exposure prophylaxis, or PP.
But getting that PPP is where the system breaks down. The article points to three huge barriers. The first is just awareness and compliance.
A massive hurdle. One study found that nearly 21% of dog bite victims didn't get the anti-rabies vaccine, the ARV, at all. And of those who got the first shot, half didn't complete the full course.
And the second barrier is the cost and supply of something called RIG.
Rabies immunoglobulin. This is the crucial, life-saving injection of antibodies for severe bites.
But it's incredibly expensive.
Prohibitively so.
Yeah.
Up to 20,000 rupees. And there are constant shortages in public hospitals. So you have these desperate families. And remember, 40% of victims are children turning to quacks who use chili powder or chalk. It's tragic.
And on top of all that, there's a national shortfall of the vaccine itself.
Yes, India needs 60 million doses a year, produces 50 million, and then exports 15 million of those. It's a deeply unethical domestic shortage.
So you have a crisis in supply, cost, and compliance, all while trying to manage an estimated 80 million free-roaming dogs.
A Herculean task. The official approach is CNVR catch, neuter, vaccinate, release. But the article says there's very little evidence it's being implemented effectively at the scale that's needed.
So are there any actionable solutions on the table? Any hope?
There is. It requires a multi-pronged approach. First, public responsibility. People who feed strays need to take ownership of getting those specific dogs vaccinated. We also need better quality enclosed shelters.
And from a health policy perspective?
Ensuring the existing vaccines and RIG are free and universally available. But the really heartening news is the development of indigenous rabies monoclonal antibodies, or RAMs.
Which would be a cheaper alternative to RIG.
Much cheaper and more accessible. They're currently under intense safety monitoring and waiting to be included in national guidelines. That could be a real game changer.
Definitely something to watch.
Ooh.
Let's move now to our text and context section, starting with Article 5. The Petrodollar and the physical blockade of global shipping.
This piece highlights a really interesting shift in how U.S. sanctions are being enforced. We're moving from the financial to the physical.
And the trigger was President Trump's announcement of a total and complete blockade of Venezuelan oil tankers.
Exactly. Citing the seizure of specific ships like the Skipper, it's a signal that the usual financial sanctions, the cheap and easy way of doing things, are no longer enough.
Can you just quickly remind us how that traditional power, the petrodollar system, works?
Of course. The petrodollar means the U.S. dollar is the hub for almost all global trade, especially oil. This gives the U.S. immense leverage. Any international bank needs access to the U.S. financial system.
So if they violate sanctions?
They face crippling fines, like the $9 billion fine against BNP Paribas, or they get cut off completely. The dollar is the ultimate compliance tool.
But for something physical like a ship, you need more than just banking controls. The article talks about classification and insurance.
Two critical choke points. Shipping is high risk, so every vessel needs insurance. U.S. sanctions force the big insurers and the classification societies, the bodies that certify a ship is seaworthy, to withdraw their services.
And a ship without insurance is
Untouchable. It can't legally dock or trade. The second point is flag registration. Countries will deregister a ship out of fear of U.S. anger, which then allows navies to legally board it under international law.
So the fact that the U.S. has to resort to a physical blockade means that these traditional levers are being bypassed.
And that raises the big question: how? The answer is the rise of a shadow fleet.
Tell me about that.
It's a fleet of older, less traceable ships operated through a collaboration between sanctioned countries, Iran, Russia, Venezuela, probably with some help from China. They use shell companies, they turn off their transponders, they find alternative insurance.
So they've built their own ecosystem outside of U.S. control.
They're trying to. And the need for a physical blockade is a sign that to some extent they're succeeding. It's a major challenge to the U.S. hold on global finance.
A fundamental shift indeed. Okay, let's transition to our second text and context piece, Article 6. Bollywood 2025. The struggle between spectacle and soul.
This article lays out a very clear dichotomy in Bollywood right now. On one side, you have the dominant trend, populist spectacle.
So hyper-nationalist films like Durandar, huge action movies like Sikandar, and films with overt communal messaging like The Taj Story.
Exactly. It's the reduction of cinema to an ideological tool that fosters jingoism and often at the expense of any kind of creative nuance.
But running alongside that, there's this quieter stream of what the article calls good cinema, or the soul genre.
Yes, and these are the films that are focusing on critical social issues and artistic creativity.
Okay.
Things like Superboys of Maligan, which celebrated amateur creativity over manufactured heroism.
Or Sitara Zameen Par, which was that empathetic sports drama about a neurodivergent teen.
Right, and even a commercial hit like Jolly LLB3 managed to expose systemic corruption without resorting to flag waving.
The article also notes that one of the most neglected areas in mainstream film is still the issue of caste and Adivasi narratives.
Absolutely. But this smaller stream of cinema is tackling it head-on. You have Phula, the biographical drama about fighting caste oppression. You have Dadak 2, which directly addresses intercaste romance and violence.
And even blending it with modern issues like tech.
That's where a film like The Humans in the Loop comes in, exploring AI data labeling and Adivasi identity and the biases in technology. It's vital work.
But the struggle for these films is getting seen. The article mentions Agra, a film about class and sexual repression, which couldn't even find exhibitors.
And that's the tragedy. The genre, the soul of cinema, has to survive, but it's being overlooked by audiences who are, as the article puts it, bewitched by the spectacles.
So it needs active support from viewers.
It needs patronage from regular audiences. Otherwise, cinema risks becoming a completely soulless political instrument, and the spectacle will be all that's left.
Let's move to our business section now, starting with Article 7. The GLP-1 pill, reshaping the global food industry. This feels like more than just a medical story.
Oh, it's a massive market disruption story. The game changer is the FDA approval of Novo Nordisk's Wegovy, the GLP-1 drug, in pill form.
Because the pill is cheaper and gets around people's fear of injections.
Precisely. And analysts are predicting this widespread adoption will cause huge long-term shifts in what we eat and how much we buy.
Do we have data on that yet? How is it actually changing household spending?
We do. A Cornell study looked at 150,000 households and found a 5.3% drop in grocery spending and an 8% drop at fast food restaurants for people on these drugs.
And what are they cutting back on specifically?
The obvious things, really. Salty snacks, liquor, soda, bakery items. The only modest increases were in things like yogurt and fresh fruit.
So the big food companies have to be scrambling to adapt.
They are pivoting right now. They're seeing a huge shift in preference towards protein, fiber, and smaller portions.
And how are they responding?
In a few ways. Companies like Conagra are now marketing their frozen meals as GLP-1 friendly, and they're outselling their rivals. Nestle has launched a whole new product line for users called Vital Pursuit. Danone is seeing double-digit growth in their high-protein yogurts.
And restaurants. They must be changing their menus, too.
They are. Chipotle added a high-protein menu with options like just a single cup of meat. Other places are adding smaller, cheaper portions to satisfy people who just can't eat as much anymore. It's a complete reevaluation of their business model, all driven by this one pill.
Remarkable. Finally, let's turn to Article 8. Intel's Art of the Deal, Lip-Bhutan's high-stakes turnaround. This sounds like pure corporate drama.
It absolutely is. It starts with the new CEO of Intel, Lip-Bhutan, a major investor with deep ties to China, waking up to a pre-dawn attack from President Trump on Truth Social demanding he resign.
An incredible way to start your day.
Tan, who had always seen himself as a technocrat, had to scramble. He had to call in favors.
Which led to this pivotal 40-minute meeting at the White House.
Right, and he got allies like the CEOs of Microsoft and NVIDIA to vouch for his patriotism. But the key was what he did in that meeting. Instead of just taking a standard government grant from the CPS Act,
He cut a
a
deal.
revolutionary deal, he gave the U.S. government a nearly 10% equity stake in Intel in exchange for a $5.7 billion cash infusion.
Making the government Intel's largest shareholder. That is unprecedented.
It gave Intel this too strategic to fail halo. The White House could sell it as getting a great bargain for the taxpayer, and it signaled a potential new era of U.S. industrial policy, with the government as a direct investor.
And the market loved it.
Intel's stock surged 80% since he was appointed, crushing the S&P 500.
But the core question remains. Does a venture capitalist like Tan have the deep technical expertise to fix Intel's manufacturing problems and catch up to TSMC?
That is the billion-dollar question. High-end chip making is one of the most complex engineering feats on the planet. The precision required is, as the article says, like targeting a quarter from as far away as the moon.
So what's his strategy to fix the engineering culture?
He's cutting deep, laying off 15% of the workforce. And he's flattening the management structure so he can hear directly from the engineers on the ground, bypassing the bureaucracy.
But what about those conflicts of interest that got him into trouble in the first place?
Yeah,
He's still splitting his time with his investment firms, right?
he is. His contract only requires such time as is necessary, which is unusual. And it's still causing friction. The board apparently pushed back on an acquisition this year because of alleged conflicts with his venture portfolio.
But that government deal was the masterstroke. It was the catalyst.
It was the lifeline. It stabilized the company. And just weeks later, Tan secured a $5 billion partnership with NVIDIA. The CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, called him a longtime friend. That government deal provided the confidence and the capital they desperately needed to even have a chance to compete again.
Just a fascinating story where geopolitics, high finance, and incredible engineering all collide.
You know, what stands out to me across all these diverse topics today, from geopolitics to city planning to microchip manufacturing, is the increasing role of soft power and systemic architecture.
What do you mean?
Whether it's engineered cinematic influence or the power dynamics of urban empathy or weaponizing the petrodollar, it feels like the traditional models of stability are just being rapidly superseded by these much more transactional and technologically driven realities.
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we're eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.